lieber Bernd Scherer, sehr geehrte Damen und Herren. Vielen Dank für die einleitenden Worte. Wir freuen uns alle drei sehr, mit Ihnen gemeinsam hier den Startschuss für die 100 Jahre Gegenwart geben zu können, wenn Startschuss in dem Zusammenhang das treffende Bild überhaupt ist. Der Angriff der Zeit auf das übrige Leben, Labor, das ist, wie Sie alle wissen, die Überschrift, unter der diese Veranstaltung steht. Und wenn ich diese Überschrift richtig verstehe, dann pointiert sie einen Filmtitel von Alexander Kluge mit Blick auf das Labor als eine Verzeitlichungsanstalt. Demzufolge ist es eben nicht länger die Gegenwart, die die übrige Zeit angreift, wie bei Kluge, sondern es ist die Zeit insgesamt, also Gegenwart, Vergangenheit und Zukunft, die jetzt das Leben angreift, und zwar mit tatkräftiger, um nicht zu sagen maßgeblicher Unterstützung des Labors. Ich will mal versuchen, das ein bisschen zu erläutern, also wie ich es zumindest verstehe. Die pointierte Zusammenführung von Zeit und Leben im Labor lässt sich auf ein präzises historisches Datum beziehen, nämlich auf jene bahnschlagenden Experimente, die Hermann von Helmholtz vor mehr als 150 Jahren in Königsberg angestellt hat, um die Fortpflanzungsgeschwindigkeit von Reizungen im lebendigen Nerv erstmals präzise zu bestimmen. Helmholtz hat diese Messungen in einer schönen Metapher als eine Mikroskopie der Zeit bezeichnet. Und ich möchte hinzufügen, dass wir im Grunde bis heute mit den Auswirkungen dieser Zeitmikroskopie zu schaffen haben. Immer dann nämlich, wenn Laborwissenschaftler ihre genauen Zeitmessungen am menschlichen Organismus als eine Art Fenster benutzen, um uns zu zeigen, dass an uns körperliche Reaktionen geschehen, dass in uns Prozesse ablaufen, von denen wir nichts wissen, von denen wir nichts wissen können, dass wir also, wie dies eben schon Helmholtz sagte, eigentlich im Inneren unseres Wesens hinter uns selbst herhinken. This, however, is only one of the conjunctions between time and life as they are operated in and by the laboratory. The title of this session is evocative of numerous other forms that experimenters used and created when investigating biochronological phenomena. Think of tissue cultures, for example. This experimental technique allows researchers to grow human cells outside of the living body. Once taken out, the cells are triggered to reproduce themselves in glass vessels, thus becoming virtually immortal. The often quoted case in point is the HeLa cell line that still exists in laboratories worldwide, whereas its donator, donator in quotation marks, Henrietta Lacks, has died more than 50 years ago. Or think of the remarkable relations between time and life created in a branch of research that calls itself experimental paleontology. To study the phenomenon of adaptation at a macroevolutionary scale, microbiologist Richard Lansky and some of his colleagues took a small group of E. coli out of their population and threw them into the freezer. Bacteria can survive freezing for long periods without damage at minus 80 degrees Celsius. At that temperature, evolutionary processes, including mutation, are completely stopped. Some days later, Lansky took the bacteria out of the freezer again and put them back into the population they originated from. That way, he could study competition between resurrected ancestors and their descendants in the same experimental environment that the ancestors first faced and to which the descendants had evolved adaptations. This is time travel in the laboratory. Now, despite the fact that experimental activities are multifaceted and differ in rather complex ways, even in the same type of experiment, we might venture into describing some of their basic features. First of all, by means of their materiality and their semioticity, experiments provide a frame. Similar to a camera, they operate a certain cropping of reality. In joining and juxtaposing instruments, recording devices, and human as well as non-human organisms, experimental setups circumscribe a space of capturing, representing, and measuring organic and or non-organic processes and phenomena. At the same time, another slightly offset analogy imposes itself. Experimental setups have also cinematographic traits. Helge Novotny has suggested that when referring to experiments, we should speak of a presence that is in itself dynamic, characterized by the simultaneous availability and serviceability of all the experiment's components, be it frogs, bacteria, or human test subjects, then certainly energy sources, vessels, and or freezers, and finally recording surfaces of all kinds. On this basis, timescales can be observed that differ from those outside of the laboratory. Similar to a movie, experimental setups allow at repeating individual sequences of interest and to focus on, and thereby, as it were, to slow down certain aspects. In other words, just as the cinema, experimentation allows for a temporal thickening of the present. So, vor diesem Hintergrund ist es, so hoffe ich jedenfalls, keine wirkliche Überraschung mehr, dass wir uns unserem Thema über einen Film nähern, der nicht nur von Experimenten und Zeitreisen handelt, sondern der selbst auch ein experimenteller Film ist. 1962 in die Kinos gekommen ist Chris Markers La Jetée, spätestens in dem Moment zur Legende geworden, als Terry Gilliam mit 12 Monkeys eine freie Bearbeitung dieses Films für das große Publikum ins Kino brachte, wohl wissend, dass La Jetée seinerseits die freie Bearbeitung eines anderen Films gewesen ist, nämlich Alfred Hitchcocks Vertigo. Unabhängig davon hat Markers Film, der bekanntlich fast ausschließlich aus Standbildern besteht, in den Filmwissenschaften zu weitreichenden Grundsatzdebatten geführt, beispielsweise zu der Frage, ob Bewegung wirklich ein essentielles Merkmal des Kinofilms ist oder ob es letztlich nicht ganz einfach der Raum zwischen den Bildern ist, der entscheidend ist. Zu diesen Debatten können und wollen wir drei nichts beitragen, simply because we lack the expertise of film scholars. Our starting point is comparatively simple. We take it that La Jetée is a science fiction movie, but a science fiction movie in a strong sense. Markers' movie engages so intensively with science as if it was eager to define the established genre of science fiction in entirely new ways, namely as a profound reflection about the relation between science on the one side and fiction on the other. By means of its plot, La Jetée defines at least three layers of time: a present that is projected into the near future, a past that is close to the French present of the 1960s when the film was shot, and a remote and abstract, almost intangible future. Our suggestion is that these three layers correspond to various degrees to the three time forms with which modern science has confronted the 19th and 20th centuries. Namely, first, the extremely short time spans of nerve physiology and experimental psychology. Second, the deep and potentially abyssal times of geology and evolutionary processes. And third, the abstract space-time continuum of special relativity. Now, very briefly to the structure of this session. As you heard, we'll have the screening of the movie at the end. And before that, each of us will give a sort of 10-minute statement that in one way or the other refers to one of the stills taken from the movie. After that, we will have some time for discussion, first among the participants of the panel, and then also with the audience, that is, if you feel up to it. And finally, we will watch then together the 30 magic minutes of Markers' movie, not so much as a conclusion, but in a way as a grand pathway to open this fabulous project. Der Film wird hier in einer deutschen Fassung gezeigt. die uns freundlicherweise das Arsenal zur Verfügung gestellt hat. Es ist keine digitale Kopie, sondern ein echter Film, der gezeigt wird. Ich hoffe, Sie wissen das zu schätzen. Und das Hin und Her zwischen Englisch und Deutsch, was Sie jetzt in meiner Einleitung so ein bisschen schon mitbekommen haben, hat gewissermaßen Methode. 2 der Talks werden in Englisch sein, einer wird in Deutsch sein. Und am Ende gibt es eben auch den Film in Deutsch, aber ich kann Ihnen versprechen, der Film selber beinhaltet eigentlich dieses Hin und Zurück zwischen verschiedenen Sprachen. Ich denke, wir kommen noch darauf zu sprechen. Ja, okay, then this would be all for now. And I'm extremely pleased that Jimena has managed to come and to share this event with us. So without further ado, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you for coming. Thank you for being here at this late hour, and thank you for listening to me in English. So we cannot change the past, and we have to wait for the future. It may seem to us that we've always known this, but actually we haven't. The rules of causal transmission have changed radically in the last 100 years. In every distinct historical epoch, from ancient times to the present, our view of how we can or cannot access the past or the future has been tightly connected to particular technologies in use, and these are mainly communication and transportation technologies. It was actually Einstein who set the standards of our modern conception of temporality, and Henning referred to special relativity. In 1911, he said, "One cannot telegraph into the past." So why not? Telegraphing into the past meant traveling faster than the speed of light. It meant having a messenger that was faster than causal transmission. So this messenger could overcome another one, a slower one, could intercept the message or the action that had been started. If this messenger existed, he could change the past, and he could actually kill his own grandparents, and this is called the grandfather paradox. But return to note the importance of the word telegraph in the phrase, "One cannot telegraph into the past," and I will return to that. So in 1911, when Einstein said this, his theory was not widely embraced, and many readers, amongst them the philosopher Henri Bergson, believed that the physicist's notion of time did not fit at all with our actual experience of it. The two men met in 1922, and they had a debate where one of them stressed the objective nature of time and the other one the subjective nature, the human quality. These criticisms were heard far and wide, and they even affected Einstein never got the Nobel Prize for relativity. And the presenter of the award said that this was Bergson's fault. But one of the things that Bergson did in his critique of Einstein was that he disputed the fact that you could see these fictional tales that Einstein was telling about time travel and twins and time dilation, shrinking proportions. And he actually compared Einstein's talent to H.G. Wells, the science fiction author who had written The Time Machine in 1895. And in that book, he had considered time as a fourth dimension, 10 years before Einstein wrote the 1905 paper. So what I find very interesting is that 1 year after his debate with Bergson, Einstein felt compelled to intervene in a science fiction debate. And he took time off what was then a very busy schedule, he was already a very famous man, to write a preface to a science fiction book called The Stars in World History, or the Gestirne und Weltgeschichte. It was published in 1923 by an author called Felix Eberty. And Eberty described time travel scenarios, and he also described ways in which one could see the history of the world run backwards. So if you could travel faster than the speed of light and land in a star where our current light waves had not reached, you could actually see the world in a past state. He would say the example he used was at the time of Abraham. Was this popular science or science fiction? In fact, Felix Eberty's book had been considered popular science until Einstein wrote the preface to this book, and it had been taken by many authors in Germany, Aaron Bernstein, who wrote popular science books, extremely popular, that Einstein himself read. So as a grown-up, he decided to write the preface, and he said that not everything was possible because one could not travel faster than the speed of light. But a damage was done, and Einstein never got the prize for the work that made him famous. And a number of writers, including Gaston Bachelard, started poking fun at his fantastical examples. All the tales of passing trains, he said, of aviators who smoke cigars on lengthened and contracted periods of time. And he wondered what purpose they actually served. He concluded that modern science was more poetic than poetry had ever been. And there were many other thinkers who talked about and started laughing at these trains, revolving sidewalks, railway tracks, boundaries made of clocks, spaceship travelers, etc. Why were relativities popularizing, allowing to give their imagination free rein in certain ways, but not in others? Eberty, one of the stories that he said that got retaken by Aaron Bernstein, and I'll read a quote. He said, he's describing a traveler that left the Earth and traveled faster than the speed of light. He said, in one point in space, the light of the scenes of the French Revolution is just coming into view. And even further away, the invasion of the barbarians has just become the order of the day. Alexander the Great is still conquering the world, and even further away in space, the representation of Earth's past by way of light will just be advancing into the future. Historical events that have long been dead for us will just be coming to life. So again, to give you a sense, this was considered popular science when it started, when they were first published in 1823. Then we have Einstein in 1911 saying one cannot telegraph into the past. And in 1923, he writes the preface to this book so that it comes, with a trigger warning for students who read it. And in the preface it said, the theory of relativity saves us from these characteristic conclusions. So I'm retelling this episode of history to remind you just how recent and how contested our contemporary views about time travel are. In Einstein's time, the telegraph and electrodynamic technologies more generally, technologies of transportation and communication, were used as models for understanding causality more generally. Also think how he defined simultaneity. And he used this phrase, which is very famous and has been reprinted over and over again. He said, simultaneity is the pointing of the little hand of my watch to 7 and the arrival of a train are simultaneous events. So it is not a coincidence that we find throughout Einstein's writings on time, telegraphs, wristwatches, light signaling metaphors, and of course, trains. These things provide the sort of material culture that determine our sense of the here and now, and the possibility or the impossibility of time travel. While we also see that many other thinkers have started to unpack this supposedly simple category of the here and now, and among them you can count Walter Benjamin, Martin Heidegger, and also Derrida's critique of the metaphysics of presence is connected to unpacking this apparently self-evident category. I want to contrast this story with a period in the scientific revolution. And in order to give you a sense again of how our views of what is possible in terms of time travel are conditioned by particular material context. And this is Robert Hooke's Micrographia, and he's defending the use of the microscope. But he actually argues that the microscope can be an instrument for looking into the past. Because of how it enlarged certain samples, it revealed a new geological history of the Earth. So in Chris Marker's film, and I will now refer to that, one of the very stunning things that you will notice is that it is made mostly entirely from still photographs. So it breaks decisively with our view of cinematographic linear time that adds the images together by a machine in a sequence. And once you have the still photographs, you start to question our common way of understanding movement of the screen as cinematographic. And you start to think about the relation between narrative structures and standard techniques of representing causality and movement via machines, both the recorder and the projector. So one way of analyzing time in this film, and therefore its relation to the particular context in which it was made, is through these binaries that also occupy very powerful roles in contemporary culture. The still versus the moving, the now versus the historical. Henning divided them in three parts. The symbolic versus the narrative. A salient moment, or also what Goethe would call a pregnant moment, versus any moment whatsoever that can be associated with Jules Etienne Marais and later discussed by Gilles Deleuze. And I talked about these binaries yesterday, and it's something that I investigate in my book on Einstein and Bergson. But I would like to leave them behind and point to another way in which Chris Marker reveals temporality. And as you look at the movie after our presentations, I'd like to consider other aspects of markers of time which generally would not think have to do with time. And this one in particular has to do with the title of the movie, The Jetty, the jetty at which it's in Orly Airport in Paris, and it serves as the launching pad for traveling across time, subjective and objective worlds from fiction to reality. But it's also the place of the main character's romantic encounter with, at some point, it's a woman that he loves, another point is his mother. And also, this is the image from an encounter in the Museum of Natural History. This is a place that collects specimens and preserves them through taxidermy, which gives us a sense of layered time. But again, like the jetty, it is a geographic location that's an encounter. What makes it important, I think, in the narrative is the encounter, and that is what makes it a launching pad for traveling in time. Marker's film shows us how we can travel in time despite the fact that the cinematographic machine, either using long takes of the documentary or highly edited and fictional films, are built on two very constraining notions of temporality, one that I generally associate with the Einsteinian and the other one with the Bergsonian. It actually makes us realize that average things like telegraphs, trains, elementary objects of everyday use, by virtue of our modern conception of temporality, or even in his case, in the airplane, the terminal, the museum, are essential tools for establishing time. But because they're places of communication and communion. The jetty at the airport is very powerful in the film, is a place where we hurry or wait to meet someone. It is for that reason, and I'd look forward to getting your opinion on this in the discussion, but I believe that it is for that reason that it continues to be a place for time travel. He shows us why Einstein's redefinition of time also occurred at a jetty, at the train station. Go back to his phrase, the pointing of the little hand of my watch to 7 and the arrival of a train are simultaneous events. So I want to claim that this sentence became so important for physics, the sentence that revolutionized our notions of simultaneity, because of how it resonated with millions of passengers waiting eagerly at a station for someone to arrive. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation. As many of you, I knew the film before, but not really. Seeing it again, I realized how little I knew about it. And I found it quite impossible to talk about this extremely complicated film in 10 minutes. So I decided to do it at least in German written text. and to compress maybe 12 minutes in 10 or something like it. And I had a talk with my Übersetzer, and he has a really great voice, so you have a deluxe version if you listen to it in English. Okay, ich habe dem Beitrag.
My talk is called you can think that time is ecstasis, but nonetheless you buy a watch. It's a quote. It's by Emmanuel Levinas, but it's a wonderful one. The Third World War has taken place. There's a number of people that survived, and a contaminated Earth, where there's no human life, is no longer possible. Obviously, I didn't foresee that somebody would call me, so sorry for that. Now, in the sewage of the Paris, there's only just a couple of people surviving. There's no opportunity of survival, and that is really the story of La Jetée, Chris Marker's film, and he has really envisaged that by way of stills, and so this relationship between the story and the film, that may be the reason why Susan Sontag calls La Jetée the most disturbing and most disquieting film that has ever been recorded in February 1962. To imagine at that point in time, or envisage at that time, the Third World War is not too hypothetical, because there's the Cuban crisis in the luring, and there was the deployment of Jupiter rockets at the NATO partner Turkey here in April. So USSR thought then, well, what the Americans doing in Turkey, we do that in Cuba. So there was then that world political crisis that was heating up, and so the outbreak of a Third World War was really almost imminent, and could only be prevented last minute. So, and people were really panicking. I've talked to many people who lived at the time. So it was really very real, this threat of a Third World War. Now, the Cuban crisis was just another expression of the Cold War after the Second World War, and since Hiroshima and Nagasaki, of course, effects of fallout were known. So Marker created with realistic means a situation where the world is at the brink of extinguishing, where then the history of mankind is only a marginal episode. Intelligent animals, as Nietzsche was putting it, in an otherwise unsensitive universe, which would have not left any traces on Earth, as that there was nothing ever there on Earth in terms of the human beings here. Now, humankind is about to extinguish, so that's what La Jetée starts with. So help must come from a space that is not known, so a utopia. So the hero, the test person, the hero of that film, is sent into the past, which of course presupposes that the irreversibility of time is reversed. Marker places one importance on something here in his time travel. So it's not a mind travel; it is really an actual traveling back in time, physical traveling back in time. So so the experiment really is that people are sent back in time physically. So the hero, therefore, however, is not arriving at some fantastic new world, but in some ordinary room. It is a genuine room. He underlines genuine, real rats, birds, what have you. Of course, it's a bit cheesy, this enumeration, but really, or maybe it's irony, or it's humorous. It is really also maybe a sentimental stance here that he takes in this. Now, anyways, so what facilitates La Jetée the traveling back in time? So what role does science play in this film? Well, the answer is, of course, is science. It's scientists that facilitate that. That's also the one that are dominating this new regime here. But these strange whispering German voices, the previous speaker has already indicated it, they are whispering all the time and they speak German. I'm looking forward to that German version. Anyways, so is that really something that stands for science, and that hole in time, which is talked about in the film, and of which time is to be manipulated, do they have a scientific profile? These mad German scientists, what are they researching? Neurology, toxicology, quantum hydraulics, particle acceleration, what was the film saying? Now, these test persons require a strong recollection, a strong memory. They are all tested, and to find the right test person, because they arrive in that new world and they have a major problem orienting themselves. They become mad, and so only the hero of this movie is strong enough as a personality. So they require mental power, so that time travel uses as a means of transportation mental capacity. So the scientists therefore research obviously a substance which is injected into the test person and manipulating the brain. So that may be a sluice towards a space-time continuum, but is there a link to manipulate that time bar in that film? So how time as a substance, or could be seen as a substance, could be seen as something that can be manipulated. Henning Schmidgen already said it here. The film is dealing a lot with science. So maybe it is really referring to the role of science here that is dealt with in this film. And there's a logic function of science which offers itself as a remedy, even though it is the ailment. Because nuclear war and science, there's a causal relationship. But there's another link which I find more interesting, and function which I find more interesting, is this scientific project towards manipulating time really hits a hole, however, into that future where there is death that cannot be avoided. So it opens a messianic window. It creates the possibility, as unlikely it may be, that there's eternal life. That's the way it creates time. These types of scientists are the only one who can offer something in that apocalypse, bending time towards a goal, which is salvation. Science and their victims take this hero, in a state which is already there, an anterior posteriority, as it's called. They're just not accepting it but fleeing it, so that time travel experience is based on a conventional understanding of time, which is a continuum of past, present, and future, but it instrumentalizes it. It views time as a container with the added possibility to travel within it, i.e. in time. So how is it, why is it successful? That's not something that the film shares with you, but it tells you how the hero arrives at his destination. He has enormous sensibility here, and so he arrives in the immediate screening of the film in Paris of the presence. The hero transforms that presence and creates two forms of time which repel one another. In municipal time, as Bliss Kualim calls it in her study on the colonial history of Western film realism, translating time. The view by way of which the hero looks at this perspective of everyday life, which he uses, is that of an alienation as a poetic act and as a alienation here. So unprotected, unsalvaged, de-ideologized here. The hero brings something into play which cannot be depicted in the film. It's so realistic, it's so dogma-like, so contemplative, so Benning-like, in order to name a filmmaker which comes close to this. Yeah, so you can feel the weight of the world here and the weight of the presence. And to have stills, as is done in La Jetée, highlights the distance between the real room and the pictures here, and facilitates a moment in time with some self-reflection here. We can say this has really happened. Now, this abyss is constitutive for a certain philosophy here. It is a specific subject matter of philosophy, and is a attack on time here, and is an ambitional criticism of time. As a temporal critique, it turns against everyday and scientific views of presence and history. So science remains the basic theoretic counterpole, because the question of something that is something that is turning its back against scientific investigation. So as Hannah Arendt describes it, and it is linked to enormous shock of an empty reality. So that's the ticket for the time travel of La Jetée. So it is a catastrophe that is in the making. And from that perspective, the cryptic remarks of Benjamin, writes down to Agamben, make complete sense, where the presence is the messianic moment here. Benjamin, when he said it in 1940, was clearly and obvious, and Agamben would have been the question, where's the catastrophe? Fascist Nazi scientists to do with the nuclear catastrophe, not just because of the know-how transfer, like Werner von Braun going to the US. I'll stop at this point because it was only intended to be 10 minutes. And boy meets girl and the heterosexual implication. Maybe we can talk about that during the panel discussion later. So I'll stop at this point. Thank you.
Okay. Can I have the next? Thank you. So the laboratory of La Jetée is a dark space of knowledge. Not a transparent and public structure, but a secret and illegal site. It is located underneath the surface of the city of Paris that is completely destroyed and contaminated. As the narrator explains, the scientists work in an underground network of galleries beneath the Palais de Chaillot. This network is populated by those who, after World War III, believed themselves to be the victors and those who are treated as their prisoners. The narrator is quite explicit here. He says that the victors stand guard over an empire of rats. Later on, he will describe the underground network beneath Chaillot as a camp. And in this camp, the victors carry out experiments on human test subjects chosen from the prisoners. In the course of these experiments, we are told, many test subjects are killed or become insane. In other words, even before the protagonist of the movie starts to travel into the past and the future, La Jetées' laboratory is also a space of recollection, that is, of memory. As we all recall, it was the Esplanade du Trocadero, that is, the terrace of the Palais de Chaillot, where Hitler and other Nazis were standing, the Eiffel Tower in their backs in June 1940, when translating their military action against France into a haunting image. In Marker's movie, it appears as if the Nazis had continued to rage, as if they had actually destroyed Paris and won the war. It is not by coincidence, then, that the laboratory scientists in La Jetée speak German. Or to be more precise, they whisper in German. When watching the movie in its original version, so in the French version, the result is rather uncanny. In between the clear and distinct utterances of the French narrator, bits and pieces of German language suddenly appear. Perhaps the effect is especially striking in native German speakers, and I guess it is meant to be that way. It feels as if the movie was directly addressing yourself. So this, unfortunately, we won't have with the German version we are going to see afterwards. What you hear when carefully listening are the only actual dialogues of the movie, and there are 5 of them, all rather short ones. The intensity with which these dialogues impact on the spectator can be compared to the intensity of the famous sequence that shows the awakening of the woman. In both cases, the fixity of Marker's ciné-roman is suspended, and for some seconds we feel drawn into an actual motion picture. In one case, visually, the opening eye, and in the other one, acoustically. And obviously in radically different directions. Whereas the gaze of the woman is connected to desire and life, the whispering of the scientists stands for knowledge and death. If I was asked to phrase this as an argument, I would say that both these sequences, the opening of the eye as well as the whispering scientists, are referring to one of the crucial topics or objects of the entire movie, namely eye movements. And I would add that much of La Jetées' interest, its almost pressing actuality, lies in the fact that it directs our attention to the fragility of this object. As we all know, eye movements have been turned in the meantime into a literally speculative object thoroughly threatened to be commercialized by means of sensors and digital technologies. Now, to elaborate on this, I will proceed in 2 steps. I will first explore the iconography of La Jetées' laboratory, and then what we might call its audiography. It is true that the images of the laboratory in the movie do not show us a great deal about it. All we see is a male test person lying in a hammock. He wears a cabled eye mask. Besides the hammock, 2 scientists are standing, and on other shots they are also sitting. They observe the experiment. On earlier shots, we see that to start the experiment, the scientists inject a substance into the body of the test subject, but it remains unclear whether it is a drug or some virus, whether it is a mind-altering substance or some sleep-inducing stuff. What we then see is precisely what the scientists observe. Once the effect of the injection sets in, the test person is suffering, tormented by spasms and convulsions. Despite these rather dramatic aspects, the general aesthetic of the experimental setup is highly evocative of the setups used in sleep research. Physiologist Nathaniel Kleitman is often quoted as the founding father of experimental sleep research, and together with his assistant Eugene Azarinsky, Kleitman discovered the phenomenon of rapid eye movements, or REM, in 1953. To study these movements, the two scientists used so-called electro-oculograms. By means of electrodes placed on the skin surrounding the eyes, they translated eye movements into graphical curves. And I would argue that the cabled eye mask that the main character is wearing during these experiments alludes precisely to this technique. So much for the iconography. Now let us turn to the whispering scientists. They give us some additional information about the experiment they perform. First, the two scientists talking to each other stand in a specific hierarchical relationship to each other, since one, obviously the assistant, calls the other one professor. Second, it becomes clear that their observations are not restricted to the naked eye. Die Instrumente sind in Ordnung. The assistant whispers at one point, and later the professor asks, Was sagt das Kardiogramm? We don't see the corresponding device on the shots, still we hear the beating heart of the test person. And finally it becomes clear that the two scientists are doing what every lab scientist does. They process data. Thus they read off their instruments. 19, 20, 23, schon bedeutend langsamer. 27, 29. And they measure time. Wenn es nach 3 Minuten aussetzt, da stimmt was nicht. 3 Minuten? Ja. Plus, they observe body movements. Ja, die Kontraktionen nehmen zu. Ja, das ist ein merkwürdiger Reflex. Das ist eine Iris. Das kommt vom Thalamus, glaube ich. So to sum up, we could say that we encounter here the basic structure or diagram of time-based experiments at the borderline between physiology and psychology as it was defined since the days of Helmholtz. We have time-measuring instruments on the one side and inscription devices for recording bodily reactions, contractions, and convulsions on the other side. And in between, we have hypotheses formulated about the brain processes that might be the cause for the recorded events. In other words, what is pictured here is in fact an assault of time on life, mediated through the laboratory. In Lajeté's laboratory, precision instruments are about to conquer the unconscious body. There is more, however. The grandness of Marcus' movie, at least in my eyes, lies in the fact that he depicts this assault of time on the rest of life, not as a one-dimensional process, but as an authentic debate, a kind of battle. When the narrator tells us the camp police spies on dreams, this is only half of the truth, since it's not clear at all if the test subject is traveling into his own past or if he's producing new delusions. In fact, we are told about the test person that he is profoundly unsure, quote, whether he made up what he sees or whether he's only dreaming, if that's the appropriate alternative. In addition, there is one dialogue between the scientists that clearly shows their work is not being restricted to observe, but that they intervene into the experience of the test person. So, jetzt haben wir ihn soweit. Die Hälfte von ihm ist hier, die andere Hälfte, die ist in der Vergangenheit. So, das ist ja sehr schön. Dieser erste Teil ist ausgezeichnet gelungen. Jetzt müssen wir ihn bloß lange genug in der Vergangenheit behalten. Ja, wir müssen ihn natürlich zu dem Mädchen bringen. So when the two scientists go so far as to mention a lever they can use in order to make the woman appear, it seems the entire laboratory setup undergoes a kind of gestalt switch. The two scientists are not scientists any longer. They have transformed themselves into directors. What looked like a scientific experiment turns out to be a kind of experimental cinema. a precisely controlled phantasmagoria. And at this point, we should come back once again to the site where the action takes place. Fortunately, the Palais de Chaillot is not only tied to Hitler's appearance in Paris. For decades, it was the place where the Cinémathèque Française was located. In other words, the underground network of galleries where La Jetées laboratory is installed is nothing else than a film archive, a space of cinematic recollection. And if he was wanting to highlight this connection, Marker has Jacques Ledoux, the former director of the Cinémathèque Royale in Brussels, playing the role of one of the scientists. Now, this gestalt switch from experimentation to cinematography can be read as suggesting that Marker was convinced, indeed, that in our day it is time which, mediated through the gaze, attacks life. However, he seems also to suggest that the battle is not lost. Science and technology might aim to register, measure, and control our eye movements. But cinematography has the ability and the power to trigger as well as to suspend eye movements without recording them. And perhaps this is why the movie is composed out of stills. By the same token, cinematography is in a position to awaken and enforce the feel for the mental image inside of us that resist command and control. And as you will see in the movie, this is also a question of glasses. The glasses are sort of crucial elements in the entire movie. Okay, I stop here and thank you for your attention.